Hey traders, it's John Fortune here of this week's Weekly Forex Forecast. We're going to start off with the dollar index as we always do. Be sure as always to watch the video all the way through to the end because we will be highlighting ones to watch for next week as we run through all of the markets this morning. Starting with the US dollar index, last week and for the last couple of weeks we've noted that this market has been in a near-term uptrend. It's structured to the upside in what looks to be a fourth wave before another leg down at some point in this market. We did take out both targets to the upside at the 91.01 and the 91.49 last week, and we sold off quite hard. This was actually an engulfing candle, an outside day in the daily chart from a key area of resistance at the 91.49. So very simply put, going into this week, the near-term uptrend is still intact. This, what looks to be a corrective wave currently in the bigger picture, is still intact and it is still technically bullish, but we are sitting at a key area of resistance to the 91.49 and we did have quite a hard sell-off from here. So going into next week, I am going to have a bullish to neutral bias on the dollar. It means that generally speaking, I will be looking to trade the dollar pairs as they are structured without a very strong bias in the dollar one way or the other, because we could start to reverse lower from here, but at the same time the uptrend is still intact, so any shorts could be slightly premature. It also means, as we've looked at in previous videos and has actually played out very nicely, is that there are likely once again to be better opportunities outside of the dollar pairs going into next week, just as there have been in the previous weeks, and that will once again be something which is high up on my agenda next week, is looking outside the dollar pairs for those potential opportunities. Next we have crude oil. Now last week we noted that this market was in a secondary trend, a correction counter to the overall primary trend, and we have now broken to the upside in this market, making this one to watch going into next week. Any correction back down towards the 53.210 is going to be viewed as an opportunity to look for bullish reversals up towards the next key of resistance, the upside and the target set at the 57.40, although we're quite close to this now, so we would need to pull back to get some good risk to reward. And if we break through here, we're going to be looking up towards the next key of resistance, the upside and target 2 at the 60.64. Next we have euro dollar. Now last week we were looking further declines to the downside in this market, and we did take out the target to the 1.2012. Very simply put, we've started to correct already, so any deeper correction would be viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish reversals in this market down towards the next key of support to the downside and the target set at the 1.1895. Next is pound dollar. Now pound dollar is structured to the downside going into next week. However, this is counter to the overall trend as we've been looking at in previous videos. I don't like this setup that much. I don't think I will personally be looking to short pound dollar, but if you are looking to trade pound dollar, it is technically structured to the downside, and a breakout and a bearish reversal in this area is what I would need to see if I were trading this down towards the next key of support to the downside and the target set at the 1.3479. I do personally think there are better opportunities out there next week than pound dollar. Next is US dollar Japanese yen. Now last week we were looking further advances to the upside in this market, and we took out the 105.03 and also the second target at the 105.66, which represented the entire move in this market last week. Going into this week, therefore, I am still looking further advances to the upside in this market, and we are falling in line with a new, potentially developing primary trend to the upside, so it does make this one to watch going into next week. Since we're very close to the target and there's not much risk to reward opportunity here, any deeper correction would be required next week towards the 103.64, and this would be viewed as an opportunity to look for bullish reversals. And if we start to break out to the upside in this market, we're going to be looking at initiated longs up towards the next key of resistance, the upside and the target set at the 105.78. And if we can break through here, we're going to be looking up towards target 2 at the 106.09. Next is Aussie dollar. Now last week we were looking for further declines to the downside, and we did come down, take out the target set at the 0.7573, almost to the pip, and that was the move for last week in this asset. Going into this week, the market is still structured to the downside, so I would favour short positions in this market, but just bear in mind this is a secondary trend, so just like we looked at in crude oil last week, you have that risk when you're shorting, for example, this asset, of the market reversing in line with the primary trend at some point. This is why we haven't marked this as one to watch, but any deeper correction towards the 0.77390 would be viewed as a potential opportunity to look for reversals to the downside in this market. And we'd be looking down towards the next key of support to the downside and the target set at the 0.7451. Next we have New Zealand dollar. Now New Zealand dollar is structured to the upside in line with its primary trend, making this one to watch going into next week. We didn't really go anywhere last week, we just kind of corrected sideways, but this is interesting because if we have a strong US dollar and the New Zealand dollar doesn't really decline against it, what is going to happen if we have a weaker US dollar. We're going to see some strength, some decent strength coming into this market. So this is certainly on my radar next week as one to watch. Any correction, once again, back down towards the 0.71180, which we've already tested, will simply be viewed as another opportunity to look for bullish reversals. And we're going to be looking up towards the next key of resistance, the upside, the target set, at the 0.7322. Next is US dollar Swiss franc. Now, US dollar Swiss franc reversed to the upside last week. This was actually a market I did like the look of to the downside, but we never broke lower. We never broke out of this kind of counter trend move. There was a key of resistance up here. We just kind of trended to the upside, and at the beginning of last week we started to break higher. So we didn't have any bearish reversals in this market, but I did like the look of this. We instead broke to the upside, which is a breakout of what looked to be an inverse head and shoulders. Although it is still very much like the US dollar index itself is, it is still counter to the overall trend. The overall trend is still to the downside. But for the time being, we are structured to the upside in this market, and any pullback towards 0.88670 would be viewed as an opportunity to start to look for bullish reversals in this market. And I'll be looking up towards the next key of resistance, the upside, the target set, at the 0.9088. Next is US dollar CAD. Now, US dollar CAD is structured to the upside, but notice how corrective this market has been, and this is because of what's happening in the dollar index, and it's why a number of the dollar pairs are not down as ones to watch for next week, including this one. But it is still structured to the upside, so for anybody trading this market, I would be looking preferably for bullish setups. Any pullback towards the 1.26470 would be viewed as the opportunity to look for bullish reversals up towards the next key of resistance, the upside, the target set, at the 1.2951. Next we have gold. Now, last week we were looking for potential breakout to the upside in gold, and I highlighted gold in the YouTube community tab and also on Twitter. And we were looking for a confirmed break above the 1875, which never came. And you can see, if we look at the bigger picture, this was a failure of a smaller inverse head and shoulders within the right shoulder of a larger inverse head and shoulders. And since this has failed, it looks like we are now heading for further lows in this market. We are technically structured to the downside, so I would be focused on bearish setups this week. And it looks like we may have the makings of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 waves down, followed by 3 waves up of a B wave and then a C wave. So our next major target to the downside is the end of that initial 5 waves down, which is the 1764.75. So very simply put, going into this week, we've already started to correct, and any deeper correction will be viewed next week as a potential opportunity to look for bearish setups in this market, down towards the next key of support to the downside, the target set, the 1764.75. Next is Euro Yen. Now, Euro Yen is structured to the upside in line with its overall primary trend, making this one to watch this week. This was also on our radar as one to watch last week. We were looking for a pullback towards the 125.960 before a rally to the upside. We did have a nice pullback towards this area, and we did break out towards the end of last week. So very simply put, any correction once again towards the 125.96 is simply going to be viewed as an opportunity to look for bullish setups in this market, up towards the next key of resistance, the upside, the target set, at the 127.96. Next is Franc Yen. Now, Franc Yen is currently structured to the downside, but this is against the overall primary trend in this market. This market is very corrective, and I think there are going to be better opportunities out there than this pair next week. If you are looking to trade this, however, we're starting to pull back towards the 117.63, and this would be viewed as the opportunity to start to look for bearish reversals in this market, down towards the next key of support to the downside, the target set, at the 116.40. Next is Pound Yen. Now, last week we highlighted this as one to watch, and we did come up and take out the target set at the 144.560. This market is still in a full-blown uptrend in line with its primary trend. This makes this one to watch again going into this week, and certainly one to keep an eye on. Any correction back down towards the 143.15 is going to be viewed once again as an opportunity to look for bullish reversals in this market, up towards the next key of resistance, the upside, the target set, at the 145.71. Next is Aussie Yen. Now, last week I highlighted this as a market to watch to the upside, and we did take out the target to the pip at the 80.90. This market is trending to the upside in line with its primary trend, making this one to watch once again next week. We have some nice momentum in this market as well, so any correction back down towards the 79.83 is simply going to be viewed once again as an opportunity to look for bullish setups in this market. And if we start to break out to the upside, we're going to be looking up towards the next key of resistance, the upside, and the target set at the 81.57. Next is Cad Yen. Now last week we highlighted this as one to watch to the upside, and we had a really nice move and we stopped just shy of the target by a couple of pips. So very simply put, this is one to watch again going into this week, as it is trending to the upside in line with the bigger picture. Any correction back down towards the 81.24, and of course we'll be looking for this to finish the move from last week, but any correction back down towards the 81.24 will be viewed once again as an opportunity to look for bullish breakouts, and we're going to be looking up towards the next key resistance, the upside of target set at the 82.65, and if we get a break through here, especially if it takes out this target first and then pulls back, we're going to be looking up towards the next key resistance, the upside and target 2 at the 83.11. Next is New Zealand Yen. Now last week we highlighted this as one to watch to the upside, and like a number of the ones we highlighted last week, this market outperformed. We had a really nice rally coming into the 76.16. We stopped just shy of it, so we'll be looking for this move from last week to finish. But any correction back towards the 74.38 will be viewed as simply another opportunity to look for bullish breakouts in this market, as this is once again one to watch going into this week. And we're going to be looking up towards the next key of resistance, the upside and the target set from last week at the 76.16. And once we come through here, we're going to be looking up towards the second key of resistance, the upside and target 2 at the 76.77. Next we have Euro Frank. Now Euro Frank was another market we highlighted last week as one to watch to the upside, and we had a really nice rally to the upside. We stopped just shy of the target set at the 1.08380, so we will be looking for this move from last week to complete. Any pullback towards the 1.07650 will be viewed once again simply as an opportunity to look for bullish breakouts up towards last week's target if we haven't already taken it out at the 1.08380. And if we can get a break through here, we're going to be looking up towards the next key of resistance, the upside and target 2 at the 1.0871. So Euro Frank is once again one to watch going into this week. Next is Euro New Zealand. Now this was a market we highlighted as one to watch for further declines last week. We did come down, take out both targets, the 1.67270 and the 1.66650. I am looking for further declines in this market once again this week, and this does go down once again as one to watch. We started to correct, so any deep correction will simply be viewed as an opportunity to again look for bearish reversals in this market. And if we start to get bearish setups in this market, we're going to be looking down towards the next key of support to the downside of the target set, the 1.6619. And through here, we're going to be looking down towards the second target to the downside at the 1.6527. Next we have EurUsd. Now EurUsd is structured to the upside, and this near-term uptrend is actually counter to the overall bigger picture, the primary trend, which is to the downside. In order to start to look for shorts in the direction of the primary trend, we would have to break the 1.56740 first, which we haven't done. But it does look like we're probably going to come and break this next week. As it stands, however, because this is technically structured to the upside, although I personally think there are better opportunities than Euro-Aussie long positions next week, anyone who is looking to trade this currently as it stands should be really looking for bullish breakouts to the upside, up towards the next key of resistance to the upside of the target set at the 1.6023. Again, just to reiterate, long Euro-Aussie positions are going to be very low down on my list next week, and I would not be surprised to see this break the 1.56740, which would then mean I would only be interested in looking for short positions, which would be in line with the primary trend, but that only comes with a break below the 1.56740 next week. Next we have Euro Pound. Now Euro Pound really is the gift that keeps on giving. It is in an overall bear market, and I have two fundamental long-term positions on this from a couple of months back, which we put out on Twitter before they happened. We highlighted them, and also in the YouTube community tab on this channel. And since then, we've also just been shorting this. You can see this is once again one to watch going into this week, because we are selling off in line with the overall primary trend. So any correction in Euro Pound next week should be viewed simply as another opportunity to look for bearish reversals in this market, down towards the next key of support to the downside of the target set at the 0.8726, and if we can get a break through here, down towards the second key of support to the downside and target 2 at the 0.8682. Next is Eurocad. Now Eurocad is structured to the downside in line with its primary trend, making this one to watch going into next week. Any correction back towards the 1.55180 is going to be viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish reversals, down towards the next key of support to the downside and the target set at the 1.5246. Next is Pound Frank. Now last week we highlighted this as one to watch to the upside, and we did come up and take out the target set last week at the 1.23270. Pound Frank is still structured to the upside in line with its primary trend, making this one to watch again next week. Any correction back down towards the 1.21320 is going to be viewed as another opportunity to look for bullish reversals in this market, up towards the next key resistance, the upside the target set at the 1.2426, and on a breakthrough here we're going to be looking up towards the second target to the upside at the 1.2529. Next is Pound Aussie. Now Pound Aussie is structured to the upside, although it is not in a full-blown uptrend. I do only favour long positions in this market therefore next week, and any correction towards the 1.7616 is simply going to be viewed as a potential opportunity to look for bullish reversals up towards the next key resistance, the upside and the target set with 1.8166. Next we have Pound Cad. Now last week we highlighted this as one to watch to the upside. We want to see a correction towards the 1.72990 before a reversal back towards the 1.7665. We did have a really nice rally after a correction in this market. So very simply put, for anybody not involved from last week, any correction once again towards the 1.7299 is simply going to be viewed as another opportunity, as this is once again one to watch next week. Another opportunity to look for bullish reversals up towards the next key resistance, the upside and the target highlighted from last week at the 1.7665. Next we have Pound New Zealand. Now Pound New Zealand is pretty choppy, and personally speaking I don't like this pair that much going into next week. It's going to be very, very low down on my list, and I pretty much expect not to trade this market at all next week. We have traded into, for anybody who wants to trade this market, we traded into the 1.91070, and we are structured to the downside. So if you really wanted to trade this market, this would be the area to start to look for potential bearish setups in this market down towards the next key of support to the downside and the target set at 1.8837. Once again, I think there are going to be better opportunities outside of Pound New Zealand next week. Next we have Aussie Frank. Now Aussie Frank was in a secondary trend, a corrective mode, but it broke out to the upside last week, and this actually makes this one to watch. We are starting to trend in line with the bigger picture, in line with the primary trend in this market. So any correction next week in this market is going to be viewed as an opportunity to look for bullish breakouts up towards the next key of resistance, the upside and the target set at the 0.6952, and a breakthrough here we'll see us looking up towards the second target to the upside at the 0.7041. Next is Aussie Cad. Now last week we highlighted the fact this market was in a secondary trend to the downside, and we're still in this corrective secondary trend to the downside. We took out the target last week at 0.97520. The secondary trend is still intact, so I do still favour only short positions in this market, but just bear in mind trades in secondary trends are always riskier than trades in the direction of primary trends. Any deeper correction for anybody who does want to trade this market next week would be viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish reversals in this market down towards the next key of support to the downside and the target set at 0.9694. Next is Aussie New Zealand. Now Aussie New Zealand is structured to the downside, but this is not in line with its primary trend. We highlighted last week it looked like the primary trend was going to come to an end, and it did. We do have this kind of bear flag set up, so anybody interested in trading this would be the opportunity to start to look for bearish reversals in this market down towards the next key of support to the downside and the target set at the 1.0512. Next is New Zealand Cad. Now New Zealand Cad pretty much went nowhere last week, and it's been very corrective. I don't really like the price action too much in this market. This is kind of lower down on my watch list next week. I would really like to see a break above the 0.92380, so we can start to look for long positions again. But for anybody who does want to trade this, any pullback into the 0.92090 would be viewed as the opportunity to look for bearish setups down towards the next key of support to the downside and the target set, the 0.9132, and through here we'll be looking down towards the second target to the downside at 0.9067. Next we have New Zealand Frank. Now last week we highlighted this as a market to watch to the upside, and we took out both targets at the 0.64390 and 0.64620. Going into this week, this market is still one to watch as it is trending in line with its primary trend. We are very close to the next target, so any correction in this market is going to be viewed as a bullish opportunity next week to look for bullish breakouts to the upside. We're going to be looking up towards the next key of resistance, the upside and the target set at the 0.6504. And on a breakthrough here, we're going to be looking up towards the second target to the upside, the 0.6551. And last but not least, we have Cad Frank. Now, Cad Frank has been choppy over the last few months, but we have had a nice rally to the upside, and this is putting the market back in line with its primary trend. So this does go down next week as one to watch. We're quite close to the next target, so we would need to see a correction, and any correction in this market would be viewed as an opportunity next week to look for bullish reversals. We're going to be looking up towards the next key of resistance, the upside the target set, 0.7065. And if we can get a break through here, or if we take out the target first over here, we're going to be looking up towards the second key of resistance, the upside and target 2, the 0.7133. So that is it from me for this week, guys. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please let me know by liking, sharing and subscribing. A big thank you to everybody who does that on a regular basis, and a big thank you to everybody who comments on the channel and everybody who has subscribed to the channel so far. I want to wish you all a nice weekend, and I want to wish you all the best in your trading next week. The only thing left to say is take care, and don't forget to trade safely.